Let's talk about TikTok.
Oh,
this is big. I mean, this is just too perfect. I'll say this. I was prepared for this. I knew it was going to happen. I've made my peace with it now long ago. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This is from Donald Trump 2 days ago before he took office. He says, I am asking companies not to let TikTok stay dark. I will issue an executive order on Monday, which has been issued, by the way, to extend the period of time, it's approximately 90 days, before the law's prohibition takes effect so that we can make a deal to protect our national security. This order will also confirm there will be no liability for any company that helped keep TikTok from going dark before any order. Americans deserve to see our exciting inauguration on Monday, as well as other events and conversations. I would like the United States to have a 50% ownership position in a joint venture. By doing this, we save TikTok, keep it in good hands, and allow it to stay up. Without U.S. approval, there is no TikTok. With our approval, it is worth hundreds of billions, maybe trillions. Therefore, my initial thought is a joint venture between the current owners and or new owners, whereby a U.S. gets a 50% ownership in a joint venture set up between the U.S. and whoever purchase we choose. So
is this like TikTok's like the new NPR? Is that like?
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, I don't think nobody really knows what is meant by this, including probably Donald Trump. But you know, if we're going to have state ownership of media, there are models that can be successful that provide editorial independence. You know, we could buy up TikTok, we could buy Twitter, we could buy Facebook. You know, have them run by an independent consortium, have independent funding sources, take the profit motive out of it, Sagar. This is the type of idea I can get on board with.
Yeah.
Something tells me that's not what he has in mind.
What could possibly go wrong with that? All of that. Here's the thing about the whole TikTok thing. Basically, Trump was pro-banning TikTok. It's like Bitcoin. Pro-banning Bitcoin, pro-banning TikTok. Leaves for 4 years. Remember what I said about being gone for 4 years? Well, what happened in 4 years? TikTok became massively more popular. I think it doubled its users. An ex-engineer on the platform actually revealed 170 million people log on to the app, I think, once a month. And I think 90 or 100 million are spending an average of 53 minutes per day on TikTok.
Is this just in America?
Yeah, no, in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, in the US. That's 1/3 of the US population, and probably, God, I'm terrible at math, maybe like 40, 50% of the US adult population, just for context. So you can see here what it means and how much time people are spending on TikTok.
Yeah, it's not just the kids anymore.
No, it's everybody. I mean, I was on the metro today and some guy's scrolling TikTok right next to me. And I was like, oh, how'd you download that? You know, I was asking him, I was like, how does it work now? I was like, he's like, oh yeah, dude, it went off. Like, he had no idea who I was. He was like, oh yeah, it went off. And then it came back. I was just so excited. It was interesting. So the TLDR of all of it is it's a mess because the law that banned TikTok was supposed to go into effect on January 19th. That law would impose ruinous fines on Apple, Oracle, and all other US providers of any services to TikTok. Now, the thing is that for the Apple and all these other companies to believe this executive order is lawful, which I don't believe it's lawful at all, is to believe that they will not go through with the imposition of the fine. Now, what Tom Cotton, who is the, I think, chairman or one of the high-ranking members on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate has said is like, no executive order delaying action is legal and will face scrutiny and could impose back fines on these companies. That's part of why I'm still not 100% sure the way that it's working with the App Store, with Oracle and all these other. I know Oracle has resumed service in terms of its ability to scroll. I think it was working if you have the app pre-installed, but I'm still not sure if it's on the App Store right now. Same with the Play Store. For Google, for these people, these companies are in complete legal limbo. And the real thing that actually kind of ties Trump's hands is you can do as many executive orders as you want, but this is an act of Congress at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And so the ability for trade organizations, even Facebook, honestly, anybody, to be able to file suit against them and actually have the court system impose this block is very possible. I think what's clear to me is that Trump only cares about being popular. And he knows TikTok is massively popular and that he himself is massively popular on TikTok. And so because of all of that, his sole goal is to try and save the program or save the company, but also use some geopolitics in terms of his negotiations with China to get it done. So that's something that I've seen happen with him in the past. He's reportedly spoke with President Xi or Premier Xi in China. They talked about TikTok. I think he's going to be going to China probably in the next couple of months. That's apparently one of the first trips that he wants to make as president to discuss the issue. So he could pursue a forced sale, and it could be like some sort of negotiation. It is just objectively crazy, though, for the U.S. government to own 50% of TikTok. It's like, and by the way, I mean, you know, would it be a victory for the pro-Palestinian side? We're like, well, we saved TikTok, but now the government has control. Yeah, what do you guys, listen, Gaza people, what do you think is going to happen if the government owns 50% of that? You know, good luck with your BLM and trans and Gaza stuff under the Donald Trump administration, or if J.D. Vance wins the presidency next time. What's the first thing I would turn off if you didn't want something in your culture to be happening? That's the immediate thing. So I don't think it'd be the best solution, but you guys do what you want if you're spending 53 minutes a day.
Well, I mean, we already have the model of that, which is Elon Musk's ownership of Twitter. It would look very much like that, you know, where certain things are very much prioritized and certain things are very much deranked and actively censored, including, you know, a lot of pro-Palestinian phrases and content, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just, what do you even say about it? Like, from the looking at it from the Democratic perspective, like, these people are total and complete, pathetic, embarrassing morons. Morons. Like, you couldn't predict that this would be wildly unpopular. So Trump is the person who really, you know, in his first term, towards the end of his first term, he starts pushing this. He issued some other executive order that gets struck down. It doesn't happen, blah, blah, blah. But he starts pushing it. Democrats are such idiots that, you know, the polling started to move on this where there was some nominal majority, theoretically, in favor of a TikTok ban. And like, oh, I guess we better get on board with this. I guess we better pass a law. So they pass it. Joe Biden signs it into law. And then here, you know, in the waning days of the Biden administration, they're freaking out like, oh my God, I can't believe we did this. Like, we don't want this to happen. No, this shouldn't go away, blah, blah, blah. It's like, what is wrong with you? Like, you couldn't predict the way this was going to play out. And also, by the way, do you have a single principle that you actually care about and are willing to stand by? Because polls can move around, you know? You could actually just have a value. You could actually just have a principle that you care about, and whether it's in favor of TikTok or against TikTok, you could just stand by that thing and argue for that thing. But no, they're just like blown around in the winds of wherever public opinion happens to be and basically led around by the nose by Republicans. I mean, Trump leads them into this thing, and then Trump leads them out of this thing. And they have no ability to set the messaging or the agenda themselves. It's so utterly pathetic that it is completely insane.
That's, you know, I also think it's a crisis of competence. So the law passed and the Biden administration basically didn't do anything about brokering forced sale. I mean, if you were being real, because the way to save it and for the Democrats to get credit, they could have gotten credit from the national security hawks and from the voters for saving TikTok. You passed the bill. Biden should get to China, right? I mean, he didn't have anything else going on, right? He literally wasn't even running for president. He should have flown to China, sat down with Xi Jinping, brokered some sort of deal or sale or whatever. There are multiple willing buyers here. We have a shit ton of leverage on China if we wanted to be. And then they could have saved it and they could have had it. And instead, they kind of just bumbled their way in to a de facto ban. I mean, it was hilarious too, where, I mean, how long have we been covering this story? I know in terms of my monologues from 2019. But in recent months, we're like, hey, the deadline's on January 19th. Looks like nothing's gonna happen. And then you would see like Chuck Schumer the day before be like, well, we're gonna try and delay it. It's like, dude, you're a lawmaker. Like, how did you not even know that this was happening? We're doing nothing behind the scenes. So I think there's a major competence of governance in terms of actually trying to execute the ban or even the forced sale. And also, yeah, it's like this weird, like, what are you guys trying to do here? Well, like, and that's kind of what that's the thing. I'm still confused about. Why did you guys all vote for this in the past? I don't even understand.
The thing. And that's the thing. And it's such a core problem for the Democratic Party, which is that under neoliberalism, they outsourced any core values to basically market logic, right? And a corollary of that is this idea of popularism, which is just like, let's take a poll and see what thing polls the best, and that's what we'll run on, and that's where we'll be. And again, polls change people's opinions. Guess what? Republicans really successfully changed their opinions on immigration as one example because they were willing to have, you know, something that they cared about and make the case for it over and over again. And Sagar, I know the reality also helped them make that case, but the point still stands. They were willing to have a fight even on things that were unpopular and to move public opinion. If you have no values, nothing you're willing to fight for, everything is finger in the wind, everything is market logic and testing it, then like it's just, this is the sort of pathetic situation that you end up in. And you never are going to be the primary mover. You're always just going to be chasing your tail or chasing Trump's tail or reacting to what the Republicans are throwing at you and the way that they're shaping the culture. And so that's why this story is so important outside. I mean, it's important on its own right because TikTok is such a massive platform and it is an influential part of the culture, et cetera. But it's also important because it is indicative of one of the core failures of the Democratic Party and failures of like really meeting the moment. And so, you know, for example, Trump's, we'll see how long Trump's like newfound relative popularity lasts, where he was flirting with a majority approval rating, something he has never had before. And I genuinely think a lot of that is just this sense of like, he makes decisions and he takes actions. And even if, you know, those are things that some of them I agree with or some of them I don't agree with, I'm talking about from like an average voter perspective, like at least he's taking action, he's making decisions and he's doing things. The Democrats never can make a decision. They never know what they stand for. They never are willing to just say like, yeah, I'm going to make that thing happen. That thing is important. I'm going to make it happen right now. There's always got to be 12 committees or a parliamentarian that says I can't do it or whatever. And so, you know, I feel like all of that is sort of tangled up in this TikTok story and just illustrates their utter patheticness and why they are now in minority and just lost the popular vote to friggin' Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, I think that's all well said. I see it a lot, not only with the TikTok issue, but in terms of like how they're dealing with Trump. I really think that they were just so unprepared for the collapse and lack of the resistance, and they just don't know what to do now for what it looks like. And all of the sensible things that they would want to do would be so detrimental to the Democratic Party establishment that they just like don't know how to deal with it.
That's right.
I mean, the good billionaire thing is the best example, where they're like, okay, so what are we doing here? You know?
Just for people who don't get that reference, Ken Martin, who is the leading candidate for the DNC, new DNC chair, got asked about like taking money from billionaires. He's like, well, of course we're going to take money from good billionaires and just not the bad billionaires. And of course, his definition of good billionaire is
the people who give
someone who gives money to the Democratic Party. And it's like, you know, maybe just having our country run by billionaires is bad. Whether you think they're good or bad billionaires. Maybe that's just a bad thing that you should consistently stand against. But that would require having a principle and actually caring about things.
That's
and it would, like, to your point, would be incredibly detrimental to the existing Democratic leadership whose primary skill is sucking up to rich people and raising a lot of money from them.
What I have noticed most about many people who are new Republicans in the last 4 years, specifically new vibey-based Trump supporters, is if you ask them about hypocrisy, whatever, they're gonna be like, look, I don't even disagree with you, but, and what are they gonna list? I don't like George Soros, or I don't like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg before his previous turn to
Bill
the thing.
Gates,
They're like, I've lived under oligarchic, democratic, liberal, cultural elite rule now, and I hate it. And so I'm just gonna go with the other option. And I don't even particularly like the other option that much. In a lot of ways, the Flight 93 election was 2025. It was not 2016. Maybe we should debate that at some point with a lot of other people. But in terms of the way people felt, they genuinely felt as if there was no escape from the crisis of competence, of chaos, insanity, pressure, culture, whatever. All came together in terms of Trump, because of who he is at a showman level, his ability to convey the message of, I'm just gonna do what I want, I'm willing to hit the red button and I'm gonna vote for Trump. And I've been grappling with like, how did this happen over the last 4 years? And it's interesting because I think what it comes back to is an indictment of liberal, cultural, elite rule. And so much of it, when you're faced with, because we're about to talk about meme coin, that's why it's a good transition, is really just comes down to, they're like, okay, but Bill Gates, you know, blah, blah, blah. And there's just not enough people who have been involved at the highest levels of democratic politics to call that out or establish any credibility on the issue, that they're like, screw you, eat shit. I'm not gonna listen to somebody, you know, who took money from George, or posing with Alex Soros and posing with Mark Zuckerberg and all these other people, 4 years ago, I don't want to hear it from you, right?
Yeah.
And so then the issue becomes a non, and that's exactly how bipartisan, what is it, the bigotry of low expectations?
Mm-hmm.
That's what's effectively now happening to American politics, is that people have so little faith that the other side is going to do anything even remotely principled that they say, screw it, I'm just going to pick the person who I think will get a little bit of what I want done. And I totally I did that. I don't like this position, but what a rational actor in a bad model. Now, how you fix that, I have no idea, okay? You're talking to the wrong guy. But I do think that feeling is so important for especially a lot of this new brosphere and others, is they just feel so beaten down by a lot of the democratic institutions and others that they just feel like as if they have no choice but to have a total escape. And that's a very hard problem to solve.
My view is effectively that after the Iraq War and the financial collapse, like that sort of like twin blow, the neoliberal order was basically done. Now, this is not the way that any normal person would articulate it, but it's like the system as it existed. Like, this is bankrupt, this has failed, this is not delivering for me in any sort of a meaningful way. We got to do something different. And so you have these twin rival movements that arise. You've got the Bernie movement and you've got the Trump movement. And Democrats really had kind of a choice. They could have either focused their primary efforts on defeating Trumpism and, making that the priority and using models from history of how we defeated, fascism in the past and right-wing reactionary movements in the past, which was through the New Deal coalition, et cetera. Or Democratic elites could primarily train their fire on that Bernie Sanders grassroots movement so that they could maintain their grip on power within the Democratic Party. And that was goal number one. I'm not going to say they didn't want to defeat Trump. Of course they did. But that was goal number one. There were New York Times articles about how they were willing to risk, quote unquote, party damage to defeat Bernie Sanders' movement. And with that as their primary goal, they were wildly successful. Wildly successful. That's what and Ryan was tweeting about this morning, that was what the identity politics invention from Hillary Clinton, that's what that was all about. That was about saying, like, you all aren't even really progressive because you're not talking about intersectionalism and breaking up the big banks isn't going to end racism, blah, blah, blah. Very effective, okay? And also really annoying to the population and created a massive backlash to the Democratic Party. And number two, like, Russiagate was also part of making sure that after Hillary Clinton was defeated, the most logical takeaway for people to have, come to at that point was this lady who was like the queen of the neoliberals. This way of doing politics, this doesn't work to defeat Trump. This isn't the thing. Like, we need to do something different. But instead of having that takeaway, they have the takeaway of Russia and collusion and the P-tape and Comey and whatever. Total distraction tactic from their manifest failures at that time. And again, it worked. It worked for what their primary goal was. It worked like a charm. And so, to me, the real, from my perspective, off-ramp from this moment where Trumpism is ascendant, dominant, no brakes on the car, maximalist approach to governance, which we're already seeing with, pardoning all the J6 people and launching his own shit coins and just like blatant, brazen theft of tens of billions of dollars from his own supporters. That was back really in 2016 was where the road diverged. And then there was another bite at the apple in 2020 with Bernieism again. But, that kind of, to me, was when the course was ultimately set. So, and the pieces you say are not, that's another way of looking at that story, right? I don't think that those two things are like at odds with each other. But my own view of our recent history and how we ended up with this, really 2016 is kind of the pivot point where Democrats decide that rather than embracing their own left-wing response to Trumpism, they're going to try to hold on to this bankrupt, discredited ideology that is being rejected not just here, but rejected around the world.
Not only that, but actively embracing, pushing the culture, and really making that the cornerstone of a lot of your argument against the right, and basically making
and against the left. And,
I mean, look, I'm personally enjoying it, right? Like, I've hated this shit from the beginning. It's literally the only reason that's what turned me to right-wing politics, was a rejection of what I thought was like cultural liberal overreach. And so to see so much of the population completely blackpilled on any credibility of the media, on a lot of cultural, like, left-wing shibboleths and things that we weren't even allowed to say over the last 8 years, or you could say it, but you're gonna have problems, and all of that. I'm really, really enjoying that. I'm curious too to see how much of that is all Trump needs to do, in some cases, is not even do anything. As long as the economy is fine, and as long as a lot of this bullshit is not in our culture, I think a lot of people might think that he's very successful. I just know so many people who are so disaffected and so repulsed by these, like, commanding heights of culture and other, that just the victory of Trump himself was enough. I've been going back and doing some more reading about the Reagan era. Very similar, actually. If you go back and you look at one of the reasons why Ronald Reagan was popular, part of the reason why the 80s was looked as like a way to save yourself from the horrible, like, consternation of the 1970s and all of that, was a very similar period of, like, inflation, chaos, of foreign policy issues, but also just, like, crazy shit going on in terms of, like, movements on the street from the New Left and the fall of the Vietnam activism, and I mean, even on the right. I mean, if we want to talk about and look at some of the big, like, right-wing, the Goldwaterism and stuff like that, that Reagan was able to resurrect with the John Birch Society. I mean, these were huge, huge debates in the country at the time. Reagan was able to use this, like, showman aspect of command in power, where, look, he's an actor, right? Yeah, he was a governor, but he had some beliefs, but at the end of the day, he didn't do a lot. But by doing that, just by kind of existing and by being this showman, this cheerleader of the United States against Soviet communism, he really was able to achieve, like, a massive approval rating and real vibe shift, in the country. I have huge criticisms of the Reagan presidency, but, I like to study. I'm like, why are people popular in their time? And I think Trump will be a huge beneficiary of a similar movement happening.
Maybe. I don't know. I already see signs of, like, tremendous pardoning the J6 people. That's not popular.
No, I don't.
Like, it's really
I don't
unpopular.
think people will care.
The meme
really
coin shit, really unpopular. So I think, I mean,
I will disagree.
Possible. It's possible, but I think you're likely to see a backlash against him. I mean, I think there's also going to be a backlash against the, more, like, aggressive and, like, visibly cruel immigration crackdown. I think it's also, I don't think there's any guarantees about where the economy is going to be either. I think there's, very possible that we have, like, an AI or crypto bubble that completely bursts. So a lot of question marks about how this is all going to go for him. I mean, it's, look, again, possible, but I think it's more likely that you're going to get some level of backlash because they are reading a mandate that is much broader than what voters actually handed them, and that leads to a lot of political.
It only
danger.
depends
You're
on
already
which.
seeing that.
I don't disagree. I made that point yesterday, right?
Yeah.
In terms of overreach and what all of that stuff look like. But I'll tell you why I disagree on the Jan 6 stuff. This is a settled question, and in terms of what I mean by that is that the January 6th, Americans heard more about January 6th and Donald Trump for a 4-year straight period than any other issue about Donald Trump. He still won the popular vote, and he won his own party. The idea that there would be some backlash to Donald Trump doing what he basically said he was going to do, at least, maybe it's a little bit more than
I mean, he didn't say he was going to pardon people, but like beating up police officers.
He didn't really say anything. That's what a lot of people forget. JD may have said something.
Right, but
Republicans may have said something.
That was not, I think, clear to people. But listen, and people vote on a range of issues.
Right.
So the fact that Trump still gets elected by a point and a half doesn't mean that they were like, actually, January 6th was fine.
Okay, but at this point, Trump doesn't need to run for re-election.
No, I know.
He's going to do it on day one, and people will forget about it in 1 week. One of the reasons why—
But these things build, right? What I'm saying is it's a sign of the overreach. It's a sign of
I haven't seen any backlash.
Maximalist. This happened like last night at 9 p.m.
That's my point. I mean, okay, but the travel ban—
It's a sign of the maximalist approach to governance that vastly overreads the mandate that he actually received from voters. So, I think these things build on each other, right? I think part of Trump, why he was able to succeed this time, is that there was sort of rose-colored glasses, because he had been out of power for 4 years and people didn't really remember how chaotic it was and all of the worst things that they didn't like about him. But this was one of the things that they liked, that they were the most upset about. And it is a big part of the reason why Republicans in particular in 2022 did so poorly, all the Republicans that we're associated with. So to your point, he doesn't have to run for re-election, but some Republican is going to have to. And not all of them are actually none of them are as uniquely charismatic and magically politically skilled as Donald Trump is.
Yeah, no, look, I don't disagree, but I think it's day one. One of the things that they're doing is flood the zone strategy, is to embrace the vibe shift, is to do basically whatever they can at the height of their powers and try not to do anything too unpopular. So far, I think they've succeeded. I mean, in terms of a lot of these executive orders, yeah, they're gonna bitch and moan on CNN about January 6th. People just don't care. I really believe that people do not care about the pardon, or if they do, they forget about it in a week, okay? The stuff that sticks with people is both a long-term vibe. So in terms of overreach, what would that look like? It would look like foreign chaos. It would look like major inflation. Remember, Americans stuck with Biden for what, 7 months, 8 months? In the first 8 months, there was high inflation at that time. They were like, hey, do something about this, do something about this. And it was only after a while, when he didn't do anything about it, they were like, okay, now we're gonna turn on you. It takes a while. So these things need to bleed. You're talking about immigration. I mean, first of all, as we said, there's a huge reality change. Also, if you look at the New York Times polling on this issue, it's shocking in terms of the vast majority support for deportation. There's actually a huge support for mass deportation. What I mean by that is mass deportation of all illegal immigrants. It's a plus 12 issue from the New York Times. Now, to your point, am I gonna take that to the bank, right? If I'm not stupid, I know how the media and how people are gonna receive the reality of it. I know exactly what it looks like. I don't think most people do. So we'll see, probably could change. But the fact that it's almost a 70+% issue on deporting at least all of the people who are here illegally under the Biden administration is crazy. And that shows you the change in the status quo. As long as it is executed, I think somewhat competently, I think he will be more popular for it. The only way it goes south is, well, actually, this is an interesting question too. I'm not so sure if it can go south in the same way. The trust in media has now gone down so much in the last 8 years. The same conditions for the outrage over the travel ban and for deportation or closing the border, I don't know if that mechanism still exists in the same way. I could be totally wrong, but I do not see the same organic level of pushback. If you scroll, my barometer is like normal friends' Instagram stories. I'm not seeing the same stuff about racism, sexism, coming to the Women's March, can't believe he did this. I mean, you remember, people were showing up at Dulles Airport, lawyers, to try and help people to go through the travel ban.
Yeah.
I don't see any of that happening. I don't see, Catholic Charities and others organizing to try and help Guatemalans across the border. Like all this infrastructure, ACLU, right, raised $1 billion over the Trump administration. They can file and fight. Show me your 1099. I don't think that they're raising the same amounts of money this time. So I think the country's changed. It's been 8 years. The level of trust in the media and all the stuff on this issue is way down. The reality situation has changed. And another thing that I guess Trump and JD and all these other people deserve credit for is they have stuck to this argument now for a long time. And they've won, in my opinion. Now, the Democrats might be able to, if we have, I think the big overreach, like what you're talking about, would be like a mass deportation of DACA, right? That's an issue which is definitely on the other side. But absent that, I don't really see it yet. But again, a lot of this is competence-based, so
it's worth remembering that at the height of the initial George Floyd protests in Minnesota, there was a significant majority in favor of protesters burning down a police station.
Well, yeah, but again, they didn't know what that meant. But yeah, you're right.
Well,
yeah,
and that's my point.
Yeah.
Is it's one thing to, in theory, support something when it sounds bloodless and painless, and you've been told that this will bring down prices for you and help deal with housing costs and labor. Sure, you'll get better wages, blah, blah, blah. It's another thing to see the human reality of it and what that actually entails. And especially another thing when, that human reality and cruelty ensues. And guess what? Your life isn't actually better. It didn't actually make your wages go up. It didn't actually make it so that housing was more affordable or that other like core material problems you're struggling with in your life improve. And then you add to that the fact that the tariffs are very likely, I mean, if he institutes anything like what he's talking about, the tariffs will be inflationary. And that he doesn't believe, he said this yesterday, he doesn't really believe that inflation was important to people. He said he thought it was overrated.
No, he said it was second. He said
he thought it was overrated as a problem.
He might be right,
he's not taking seriously that the cost of living, I think cost of living is a core concern for people, core. And so he, I think, is telling himself that because that gives him permission to pursue a tariff strategy, which at least in the short term is almost certainly going to be inflationary. So, you know, you're right that, I mean, I don't think if he just did the J6 thing and, you know, pardon them, and then everything else people liked, like, no, that's not going to sink him. What I'm saying is that's indicative of a maximalist strategy to overinterpret the mandate and indulge his worst instincts and worst excesses. And I think it's unlikely that over the long term it will ultimately be popular, but we're gonna see.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.